You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 40. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action today. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and I'm excited to share my stories and life lessons with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today we are talking about collaborations. I can't begin to tell you what a fan I am of a good collaboration and the kind of growth you can have as a person and in your business when you start to work with other people. Marketing and strategy expert Melissa Forziat is joining me today to talk about collaborations and marketing strategies in your business. Fun fact, Melissa and I met when she asked me to collaborate with her on an online summit she was creating for business owners dealing with COVID-19. I created a presentation about podcasts and the benefits of having your own versus the benefits of being interviewed on them, and out of it, I gained new email list subscribers and followers. Melissa and I continue to collaborate on things such as this episode, an upcoming blog post, and much more. In addition to the benefit of growing your lists and business, collaborations are one of the best ways to create new relationships with others. When you work for yourself, I can't tell you enough how important it is to surround yourself with like-minded people. So sit back and discover some new marketing strategies along with why you need to ensure you start collaborating with others. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Michelle. So good to talk to you.
I am so excited to chat with you. And we got to chat not too long ago on your week-long summit webinar to help business owners during this crisis of COVID. So I'm excited to collaborate with you once again.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. Like you mentioned, we had spoken before, and I was so grateful for the depth that you went into and the quality of the information you shared. And hopefully we can get some good things out there today.
Thank you. And can you please share with our audience what it is you do and your company and what you are all about?
So what I do is I'm a small business marketer, consultant, and speaker. And I tend to work with mostly micro businesses, so businesses that have 10 or fewer employees. I've done some events as well, and that often comes from a marketing standpoint, but that's the sweet spot for me. And I just love supporting businesses and getting their message out there, especially, during a pandemic when, the awareness is so important.
And did you always do this, or how did your career come about to focusing on micro businesses and doing marketing?
This was not a straight path.
It never is. That's what I love.
I'll tell you the truth. So I was a gymnast pretty much my whole life. That's the kind of sport that you do you start from a young age. I was 4 when I started. I was 22 when I stopped at the end of college, and it was very much a part of my identity. So I was trying to figure out, how I could keep sport in my life. And I got into working with Olympic Games, Rugby World Cups, the U.S. Olympic Committee. So I worked these major international sport events and with major, national sport organizations, more on the administrative side. And it allowed me to build up a skill set in event management and working with media and developing a marketing message and sticking to it. But it allowed me to do that while staying in the sport world. So when I moved to Seattle 8 years ago, because before that I had been pretty much taking contract to contract for these big events. And when I moved to Seattle, I was still looking for work in that world, in that sport world. And at the time I was finding it very hard to get it because of the nature of the landscape at that point. So I started to look locally in Seattle for what the opportunities were. And it got more and more desperate over time because I just found Seattle to be a little bit more insular as a city. You really needed to know people and have experience here to be able to get your foot in the door. So it just so happens that in a conversation, I told somebody like I'd take you on as a client, and then I got a client from it. And that almost never happens. I mean, like any business owners that listen to this doesn't happen like this. You could talk to 100 people and tell them you're taking clients and not get a client from it. So the fact that the very first time I ever put those words out there, I got one that was big enough to sustain a business for a whole year before I figured out what I was doing. It was a big deal. But what was interesting about it was like I was able to take all of that background that I had from the professional worlds that I had been in. And now I was a small business owner trying to market my business. And I was able to not only apply the lessons I had learned to my business, but also to my clients' businesses. So it grew over time. And looking back, it feels like it ended up becoming a very natural fit to have my own business. And I think given the way it happened, I think it was meant to be the way it is. But I hadn't really planned out that path before it happened.
I love that. And, you say that it doesn't happen this way, but I kind of feel like oftentimes it does, simply because if you put it out into the world, then you make it happen. It's, the whole mindset thing. And I've shared on the podcast before that for me, coming into this entrepreneurial world, there's different words such as mindset and, we'll just put it out there and it'll happen. And it sounds like that's kind of like what you did. You put it out there and then it happened. And I think it happens more often than we think.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times businesses start because the situation calls for it. And I guess that's what it was with me as well. But a lot of it had to do with sort of staying in tune with what my priorities were. Even at the point when I was job searching and starting to connect with people locally, there were ideas that were floated by me that I could instinctively feel were not the thing I should do. And even in a position where I needed work and I was looking for work, I still knew that they weren't right for me. And so it's interesting because what ended up happening, in fact, I'll tell you this, when the meeting that I went to, the networking meeting that I went to, it was a coffee meeting with a managing director of an arts museum. And I went to that meeting knowing that there was a marketing position open on their team. And it came up at the end of the conversation where this man said to me, I have this marketing position open, but I had read that job description before I went into the meeting. And I knew that it was not very strategic. It was just like, submitting the same advertisements to the same publications over and over again for the rest of your life. And I just knew that I wouldn't stay there and that it wouldn't be very fulfilling for me. So when he said that, my gut told me that I didn't want it. And I said to him, I appreciate that. And I had noticed that position is open, but we've had this great conversation about all these projects that you want to get going that don't exist yet. So if you want to get those going, let me know. I'd take you on as a client. And like our whole conversation had been about strategic projects and events and, big marketing campaigns. And that pitch was much more in line with that. But when I walked away from that conversation for a few days, I was shaking my head like, oh, what an act of self-sabotage that was, because he was offering me basically the short list of a job that exists. And instead, I told him, how about you create a position that doesn't exist for events that don't exist and hire me for it? And it just seemed so impractical, for that next few days until I heard from him again. But had I said yes to the marketing position, I don't know that I would have. I think my trajectory would have been very, very different. And I'm not sure I would have been happy in that role.
I love that, because I think that listening to your gut, no matter what it is in life, it's so important and relevant, because we know what the answer is if we just listen, to what we think it should be. And along those lines, I know that you help businesses, people say yes and say no. and you strategize with them on what they should say yes and how it serves them. So can we go into that a bit? Like how do you determine what to say yes to or no to when it comes to your business?
Yeah, I think from a business standpoint, that looks like having a strategy. And, because I specifically do marketing, you can absolutely have a marketing strategy mapped out for yourself. And it may not have all the little particulars yet. You might start with a big picture of saying, where am I going to potentially meet the types of clients, the types of projects that I would want to take on, and how do I take them from meeting them from the first time to becoming my best client, and kind of charting out the basics of what that pathway looks like. You can do that. And even just the act of doing that firms up in your own brain what you want the path to be. And it's not that it locks you in to all the particulars, but it certainly gives you an idea of which direction you're headed, so that, once you do start getting opportunities coming your way or people pitching you ideas, it becomes a little more obvious, because it feels more innate to you now that you've done this work to say that actually does align with the path that I want to be on, or it does not. So I think it's actually perhaps more simple to do for a business than it is for our personal lives, because you can be the CEO of your business, and you can put it on paper, and you can say, here's what I'm trying to do, and know that you can start walking in that direction. But I do think, to the extent that we can do that personally as well, it's helpful, just to have a sense of like, what are your goals and where do you go? So that's what it looks like for doing it in a business setting. And from a marketing standpoint, it's really just creating that framework of a marketing strategy that helps you get there.
So what do you start with when you're looking at a marketing strategy? And, come to it with the perspective of, we probably have a lot of listeners that are either just starting out, they're thinking about a business. There's so much that goes into it, starting with a business plan. And who needs a business plan? Do you actually need a business plan? How do you develop all of these different things, including a marketing plan to attack this stuff, without getting overwhelmed, or if you don't have the resources to hire it out and outsource, where do you even begin?
Well, if you're just starting your business, like if you haven't spent any amount of time yet actually operating the business, the first question you really need to answer is, who is your audience? Because it's really important when you do create a strategy that it is aligned with the types of people you're trying to reach, which may sound like an obvious thing, but we all potentially have quite a lot of different target markets and people that could receive our services. So honing in on where you want to begin is a good place to start for creating a strategy. And then, assuming that you have some idea of what you're selling, like your products or services, and what the big picture looks like there. And it can change over time, but you have to start somewhere. So if you take those two pieces of information, then I would say starting a marketing strategy, for me, it looks like putting some definition around the beginning and the ending. So what are all the ways that you could potentially come in contact with those target markets with your brand? And you kind of make a list of all of the ways that realistically you can get out into the world and reach your audience. The types of things that you realistically will be able to do consistently, whether that be because it fits within your budget or your time, right? So you start there. That's the way people meet you for the first time. And then I go to the end and I say, what does it look like when somebody is my best customer, my best client, my best referral source? And I put that at the end. And then I start charting out the path in the middle. What are all the ways that I'm going to stay in touch with those people to keep the conversation going, to keep pushing them forward into a relationship, and to see, how much loyalty I can build, how much trust I can build, and hopefully how much revenue I can build along the way until they're my best customer. So like I said, it sounds very complicated, but for me, it's about starting at the beginning and the end and figuring that out, because then you can figure out the road to get between them.
I love that. And we've talked on the show about finding your ideal client and, defining them, because it is so important to figure out who you're talking to, in every piece of content that comes out of you. So when we're discussing your marketing strategy and all the whole middle part, does that include all of your social media, your website, your emails? What am I missing that would be included? Events? Is it every type of contact that you can possibly have?
Yeah, it's every type of contact that you could have. It's, after you've seen them, do you follow up with them? And in what way do you do it? Do you do it by phone? Do you do it with one email or a sequence of emails? Do you have them on a newsletter list? Are you, continuing to put content out there or through social media or through blogs? How is it that you can really connect with somebody? And not everybody in your audience is going to follow exactly the same pathway depending on where they started. So, it's about saying what's the most logical, natural next step for if somebody just did this, what's the next thing I can do? And I think it actually makes it a little, as much as it may sound like it's a lot of work to do that, to think that through, you'd be amazed how much time that saves when you start operating in your business in that way, because you don't have to ask the question, how am I going to stay in touch with this person? You don't have to have somebody on your to-do list and have absolutely no idea what that means. Like you could have a name that's on your to-do list, reach out to this person for a month and then just drop them off of the list and not reach out to them at all because you just didn't really know how to do it. And so if you can actually plan that out, some framework for it beforehand, it makes it a lot easier to execute. And in some cases, you're able to then take that and automate it, some of those processes, or delegate them and make it even easier to do the things that you need to do. So I think just kind of having that framework can be such an important way to create not only efficiency in your business, but do a better job of actually nurturing the people that you're talking to and not ignoring them.
Yes. I had the gals from the email collection on last month, I think it was. And this is exactly what we talked about, creating a nurture sequence in your email. And I confess that when I started my blog 5 years ago, I didn't even have an email list. So I feel like I missed out on over 3 years of people. And then it wasn't until this year that I actually created a nurture sequence and, figured out what all of that meant, because it hadn't been explained to me. I didn't know, that this is kind of like business startup 101, and it makes life so much easier.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us have those things that, oh, I wish I just would have had this 5 years ago or 2 years ago. And, you can only move as quickly as you can move, and you can only learn as quickly as you can learn. So you can't get too hard on yourself about that stuff. But when you know it now, you got to go do it. And like you said, it's interesting because I had this moment when I started to really work out my own marketing plan. And what I do is every year I'll go back and revisit that plan and tweak it and refine it and say what worked this year, what didn't work this year, what new directions can I potentially go in with what I've got right now. So that's something that started to get more specific each year as I was looking at it. And at some point, maybe 2 years in, 3 years in, I realized that I could take the level of detail that I had and I could automate some of it, because I was having a hard time keeping up with the volume of outreach that I really needed to do to be good with customer service. Like it was just too much random emailing for me to be able to keep all those lists in my head at once. So I wasn't getting back to people the way that I needed to. And I kind of had to have this moment where I thought to myself, does this get me away from my brand? I want to be approachable. I don't want to be a robot. I want to be approachable and encouraging and a real person behind this business. And, I had to think about what that meant as I started to create these systems. And for me, the decision that I made was, if I was going to not get back to somebody at all, I'd rather have something do it for me.
Mm.
And that was my threshold. I am definitely still there in my business. And if you email me, I see your email and I will get back to you. But there's a lot of stuff that happens that is in a volume I can't cope with. And I knew that. And I wanted to make sure people were being taken care of. So I don't know. I think having these things mapped out, it helps your peace of mind, but it also can make you more responsive.
Yeah. And it makes your clients feel like they're cared for, because, they are, but
Mhm.
to ensure that somebody is, responding, whether or not it's you or an automation. And, they can't quite tell because you never know sometimes if an email is automated or not. So I love that because it is important. So let's talk about we've got the strategy from the beginning to the end. We're talking about the middle. How do you kind of tie it all in with all of your content and with creating a strategy that, say it's like for a quarter? Like, I don't want to say a year because a year could seem overwhelming, especially if you're, a newbie. But how do you take on just like a quarter? Are you saying that there's a goal of, this is what I'm going to launch, or this is what I'm going to do? And say you're not launching anything, you're just, providing your services. What does that kind of strategy look like that you should really have included? Should there be, so many social media posts or, so many events? And are events even important if you're an online service provider?
Mm-hmm. I mean, these are all really good questions. I think when we ask the question about volume, pretty much anytime we ask the question about volume, my answer is going to be what is realistic for your business? Because the thing is, years ago, before we started throttling reach on social media platforms, there was a lot of knowledge going around from social media experts, for example, that it was like, oh, you need to post, 10 times a day on this platform, and it needs all different kinds of content, and don't repeat. There was all this information that most people just didn't have time in the day to execute. And so, if you get started with this idea that you have to have this high volume of outreach and you're shooting for a number that wasn't really set by you, it becomes really difficult to maintain that. And eventually you burn out and you become inconsistent, and then you're not marketing anymore. So when we talk about like creating an actual to-do list for yourself, or, a marketing strategy for yourself, I think part of the conversation is what types of activities are going to be meaningful to my audience, meaningful for my brand, and palatable to me, like things that I actually am okay with doing and you would be happy to do. There's a list of things that you can come up with. And then when you think about frequency, start with what can you do really? And if you need to be doing something and you don't have the capacity to do as much of it as needs to be done, what are your options? Can it be delegated? Are there other ways for you to get it done that don't require your specific time? So I think the first question really is, what are those activities that need to be done that are meaningful, that fit within my skill set and my interests? And then you can look at the volume and you can say, here's what the time or budget that I have really looks like and it allows me to do. And that, I would say, that's where the marketing strategy starts. And I'm a big believer in, if you're going to go do something, squeeze every last drop out of it. If maybe you can do 4 events in a quarter, but maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should do one and you should do it really, really well. And you should get really good follow-up and really good promotion behind it and really good referrals around it. Maybe that's the better use of your time. So I think, this doesn't look exactly the same for every business, but I think a marketing plan does need to take into account your bandwidth, your budget, whatever it is you're putting into the investment side of the marketing, your team, and you work from there.
And now, what does it look like if someone brings you on to help them with this strategy? How does that look different from what you just described for somebody who's doing it for themselves?
I ask a lot of those questions. When I work on a marketing strategy for a client, we'll have a session in the very beginning where I basically interview them and I get all the information about what tools they already have, the kinds of things they're already doing, who they need to be reaching. I'll do that interview and get some questions answered up front so that when I go back on my own and, start to create the marketing strategy for them, in some cases, I'm starting to chart out and document some of the things that they've already told me, but in a lot of cases, I'm filling in blanks, gaps that I know are places where they're losing people, or I'm looking at it and I'm saying, it's great that you have all this, but you don't need to be doing all this. Let's pare it down a little bit. Or maybe saying, that there's potential for other passive income or products that they can be selling or partnerships they can be building to make more money from the opportunities that they're already building. So, it always starts with a conversation with the client to really get to know their business the way that they do. But then, adding my marketing framework to it and saying, okay, well, I think with all of this, the stuff that you've got, here's where you can go with it to really nurture those conversations that you're building.
And then do you have like a specialty in of the things that you recommend? Like, is there one, I don't want to say what's your secret sauce, but like, what is it that what lights you up in the marketing strategy world that you love to educate clients on and, give them the tools for?
Yeah, there is something that lights me up there. I mean, there's a lot of things that light me up. I mean, I can talk about newsletters all day long, but I think one thing that I recommend that every business considers, especially at a time like this, but all the time, is partnership marketing. Like, how can you find allies out there in the world to help you get your voice out there and for you to help them get their voices out there too? We are so much stronger marketing our businesses when somebody else is helping to boost our voice, because the power of a referral is usually a lot stronger than anything we can say on our own. So I am a big believer that almost every type of business out there can find an ally, whether that be another business or an influencer. You could spend, a little time every week trying to find new partners. And that could be all you need to do, to grow your audience and to grow the loyalty of your audience. And, the ways that you work with those people can grow over time as you build those relationships. So I am a big believer that even in an ordinary day, go get somebody out there, be a friend to them, be a good ally to them in business, and you can go really far together. And I think that all the time, but especially at a time like this, where we're experiencing a pandemic and we're trying to figure out how to reopen. And I think it really has opened up our minds to how much we need each other in the business community to get the information and the ideas that we need.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. And, we've obviously collaborated twice now and we've got more coming, but I have some other collaborations that, I'm working on, and one's with a big influencer that, came to me. So I think that something important to remember is that it doesn't matter how big you are. If, what you have is worthwhile, then people will want to partner with you. And collaborating is such a great thing to do. You learn more about other people's businesses, other people, you grow your audience. It's free. I love everything around it. I actually have a Instagram post that's already scheduled for next week on it.
Yeah.
So
I can't say it enough. And like you just hit on, you always have something to offer. There was one client that I worked with, a couple of years back as she was really starting to grow her business. She's a massage therapist. She had a pretty small following. But the thing is, and she felt kind of embarrassed about that when we talked about this idea of talking to other businesses and collaborating with other businesses. And she said, what do I really have to offer? And I said, what you have to offer, you are the definition of hands-on with your clients. They have to have a level of trust in you for your service that implies a strong level of trust if you make a referral. Mm-hmm. And if you come to them and you say, for the thing you're dealing with, I would suggest you connect with this person. Whoever that client is, they're going to take a really strong look at the recommendation that you just made. And, it's interesting because she started doing that. She started going out and I started to help her build some partnerships out in the community. And it didn't take a lot of them for her to start seeing an uptick in her client base. And she didn't need a lot of an uptick, because she only has just one set of hands.
So many hours and so many hours in a day. Yeah.
So it was really interesting to be able to kind of reframe it and say the size of your audience doesn't have to be the only metric of what makes you a good partner. But then on the flip side of that, we see large corporations partnering with each other all the time. We see them sharing, each other's messages and boosting each other's voices and finding different ways to connect. And so why is that something that only the big businesses can do? It's not, we can do that too. And what I think is especially interesting about this moment in time right now with the pandemic is that I think before this, If you said collaborate with your competitors, I think a lot of people would have been like, what? I don't know about that. But then you get to a situation like this where we're all just trying to figure out what's going on, and you're figuring out what's happening in your industry, and you trying to get a handle on what's happening in the marketplace. And you start to realize what a great resource your
Hmm.
competitors can be. We're seeing people really embrace this idea in a much deeper way right now. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there when you just think about being a good community member and finding some allies.
Absolutely. And, in essence, every podcast interview is a collaboration
Mm-hmm.
because, you're bringing on some other expert and they're sharing their expertise and then sharing where others can find them. So you're collaborating with these people. And I was talking about this yesterday. I was interviewed on a podcast and, talking about it doesn't matter the size. It doesn't, and when you talk about competitors, one of my good friends is a competitor. We do exactly the same thing. We don't, preach about it to the world that we're, in constant contact with each other, but, we'll bounce ideas off of each other. And it all comes back down to we're individuals. We do things differently. We specialize in different types of clients. We have different ways that we work with, clients and others. So collaborating even with your competitors is a great thing and it can be done.
It absolutely can. And I think in order to really make that work, it's important to remember that you are a different person and your business is different. Even if you seem to have similar services, your whole background is different. Your value set might be different. And I think understanding what makes you different, what makes you unique, and what viewpoint you're bringing to the world, that goes a long way. And in our confidence, if nothing else. So, there's absolutely space for you and the businesses that you seem to be competing with. And there's also, in the case of like with you, there may be another podcast out there doing what you're doing, but that doesn't mean people can only listen to one.
Right.
They may want to listen to both. And, all the better, that you can boost each other's voices in that way.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that we went on to collaborations because it wasn't originally something we were going to talk about and we should have just started off with this.
Yeah,
We
I
could
could
go
talk about
on
this all day
forever.
long. I mean, I love the whole idea, the whole concept behind not just podcasts, but podcasts that interview people. Because you're right, it really does leverage this idea of collaboration and sharing ideas. And, from a marketing standpoint, it's super smart to be able to get that kind of exposure to other people's audiences on both sides.
Hmm.
It just makes a lot of sense. And it absolutely is in line with the kinds of things I advise so many small businesses to do. And you can collaborate anywhere in any way. It's just about figuring out, how do you normally reach your audience? There's options within that. And, it's the sky's the limit.
Absolutely. Oh, I love all of this. This is great. Melissa, can you share with everyone how they can find you, please?
Absolutely. So the best way to reach me is melissaforziatevents.com, which is the website for Melissa Forziat Events and Marketing. I've got so much information there. If you're at a point where you want to think about marketing and you don't have a dollar to spend on it, then I have hundreds of marketing tips of the week blogs for you to read. If you're looking for a little bit more, there's plenty of it, ways to work with me directly, but it all starts there. So if you go to melissaforziatevents.com, you'll get lots of information about small business marketing that can hopefully help you wherever you are. And, like we sort of started out saying, so some of this stuff, this idea of like collaboration and strategy and knowing what's right for you to say yes or no to, that has a lot to do with what you do in your personal life too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast talking with you again.
Thanks. Thank you all so much for joining Melissa and I today. I hope you've been inspired to reach out to someone new because even though you might be scared they'll say no or not reply, what happens if they say yes? Go out there and make a new friend or two. Who knows, you might grow your business, email list, and your future while it happens in the process. Until next week, friends, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and get connected.